to us. We're so glad to have them back here with us again. They're a precious family as well. So Brother Michael, will turn the service over to you at this time and come present to us the work there in France.
Good evening. I didn't even have to bribe you to come back. We were at a missions conference that went Sunday to Wednesday, and on Sunday evening, each missionary got up and said their deal. And the first guy said to the kids, if you come back, I'll show you some world-class Dunkin' Donut yo-yo tricks. I was like, oh, that's hard to top. And the second guy said, well, I just came back. He was from Brazil, and he said, I've got chocolates for the first 20 children who come. And I thought, oh, that's going to be hard to top, too. I didn't know what to do. So I thought about offering, the first 20 who come, I'll have an escargot. And it doesn't have the same attraction, People aren't as excited about that. So we're glad to be back with you all. We have the table back there with a new photo of our family, so you have an updated photo, and on the back of the card is the next term's goals. So take that. Thank you for your continued prayers, and also, if you don't receive our updates, we've got a little sign-up list there. I send out an email update every other month or so, just to try to keep you up to date with what's going on. I'd say that I blog, but I really don't. I'm not very good at that, and I have a hard time remembering to do it. But I do try now and then to put something on the blog as well. I was asked to keep it short tonight, so we'll try not to drag it too long. What we're going to do is we'll start off with a video presentation. It's 9.5 minutes, trying to encapsulate the last 3 years, as well as to give you a little bit of an idea of what's to come. And then I'll come back up here and try to fill you on what's going on right now, because we're part of a team effort, so the work is still going on while we're here. And fill in just a few things so you have a better picture of what's going on at this junction in the work. And then if Liz is back up here from dropping the kids off, she'll have a word to say. Then we'll open it up for questions. So just so you have an idea of what we're going on, so we'll go ahead and start with the video with this.
For the past 20 centuries, Christians have crossed geographical, cultural, and linguistic boundaries in order to announce the good news of Jesus Christ.
Although their histories are as diverse as their personalities and situations, the biography of every missionary begins the same way. It begins with preparation. Our story is no different. You could summarize our first term with the word preparation.
Although the overall goal of our mission to France is to make and mature disciples of Jesus Christ, we began our first term with 3 short-term goals in mind. The first was to learn the French language and culture. The second was to participate in evangelism and discipleship. And the third was to locate an area for future ministry. Language study occupied a significant amount of time during our first 3 years. We studied French grammar, literature, culture, and history at the University of Bordeaux. Over the course of our first 18 months in France, I took 68 credit hours of French, and Liz took 52 credit hours. Both of us were stretched by these classes, but we thank God for giving us good results. Of course, formal language study is only one way to learn French.
Simply living in France provides us with an overwhelming amount of opportunities to learn the language. Doctor appointments have to be made, neighbors expect to be greeted, cashiers want to chat. While often humiliating, these interactions increase our ability to understand spoken French and give us opportunities to use what we have studied in the classroom. Fellow Christians have also helped us by being our tutors, correcting our mistakes and answering our questions. Their help has enabled us to move from mute attendance to verbal participation in meetings.
The foundation laid during our first 18 months in Bordeaux prepared us for ministry in the Baptist Church of Saint-Denis. Over the last 15 months in this church, Michael has taught in French an average of 2 times per month.
My name is Vincent, and I wanted to say a few words about the progress that Michael and Liz have done in French since they joined our church. We have seen continuous improvements in Michael's and Liz's French, up to a level where I would say that they are almost fluent in French now. All this is a very impressive achievement, again because this language is complex. And I want to add also that we're so happy to have them with us.
Our success in adapting to the French culture is more difficult to gauge than our progress with the language. In many ways, France is like the States, modern and Western. And yet there are profound differences. We've had to adjust our expectations concerning friendships, business, education, and government administration. By God's grace, simple tasks like grocery shopping, running to the hardware store, or contacting a business are no longer overwhelming. In fact, we've grown to enjoy life in France.
We are in France to make and to mature disciples of Jesus Christ. Of course, language barriers hindered our first evangelistic efforts, but God still gave us opportunities to reach out to fellow students in Bordeaux. Friends like June, who said nature is his God, Yoonhee and Lucas, a young dating couple, and Ashin, a former Buddhist monk. We hosted these and other friends for meals, gave them Bibles, and explained the gospel the best we could. God also gave us opportunities to minister to unbelieving English speakers who were studying French in Bordeaux. Improved French skills have created new avenues of witness for us. We've shared different aspects of Christianity over meals with Antoine and Julie, Nadege, and Didier and Annabelle. God has also given us opportunities to reach out to children through teaching an English class and holding a Christmas Bible club.
Literature distribution is another avenue of evangelization. We've distributed gospel tracts and flyers at markets and placed several thousand Gospels of John and mission brochures in mailboxes. With the help of a visiting youth group, we held several well-attended Bible clubs and a rally at a public park.
We are also attempting to use the internet to evangelize the lost. We are in the process of developing a website where people can request free Bibles and a series of Bible studies that Michael has written. The second aspect of our mission is to mature disciples of Christ. We've tried to carry this out by participating in church life, encouraging people at church meetings, inviting Christians into our home, and participating in church outreach events. For the past 18 months, God has given us a more public discipleship role in the Baptist Church of Saint-Denis. There, Michael has had the opportunity to preach and teach during regular church meetings, as well as to participate in special teaching sessions. Michael is also currently leading a theological book club. The goal is to prepare the participants to teach sound doctrine to others in the church.
Since the fall of 2014, I have served as one of the pastors of the Saint-Denis Church in order to help it realize a long-held desire to plant a daughter church in a neighboring community. This relationship with the church in Saint-Denis is God's response to our prayers about our first term's third objective, locating a place in which to serve. In 2011, our team, the Tim Bixby family and our family, chose several criteria to help us identify potential areas for a future church plant. We decided to look for a place where there was a large population in need of a gospel witness that had a university. We also desired to have a like-minded church nearby for the purpose of fellowship, counsel, and help in the work. The search for a city led us to several possibilities, but God clearly directed our team to the Val de France, a group of 6 cities 20 kilometers north of Paris. Initially, we planned to work in loose conjunction with the Baptist Church in Saint-Denis, a city just outside the Val de France. Over time, however, the relationship between our team and the church has further developed. After much prayer, the church in Saint-Denis called Tim and me as pastors to teach and to help lead the church in planting a daughter church. God has answered our prayers by leading us to a large population center that needs a gospel witness. There is a university close by, and God has given us a like-minded church in whom we find fellowship, counsel, and help in the work.
Thank you for your faithful support that helped us to achieve our first term goals. Although learning French will be a lifetime occupation, we can now participate in several aspects of disciple making: evangelism, teaching, encouraging, and hosting. And God has directed us to the Val de France, where we plan to continue a church planting effort.
We plan to return to the Val de France in June of 2015. Our goals for the second term are deepening our knowledge of French, establishing a local church, and training believers. Although we've made good progress, both of us need to pursue a greater proficiency in French. We plan to continue language study through the use of tutors, personal study, and block courses.
A second goal for this next term is to establish a new church in the Val de France. I plan to teach, preach, and organize outreaches into the community. Our family plans to maintain the friendships God has given us and to make new friendships, all for the purpose of giving our friends the greatest blessing there is, a knowledge of God through Jesus Christ. There are several ways that we hope to train believers. The first is systematically teaching the Bible. The second is a special fund called the French Christian Literature Fund. Through the generosity of American Christians, we offer books free of charge to those who commit to read them. The goal of the fund is to guide Christians through a list of solid books in order to equip them to be leaders in the church. Finally, as God continues to give progress in the language, I hope to begin using my training to train other men for the gospel ministry at a Bible Institute north of Paris.
The past 3 years have at times been difficult and tedious. But when the burdens of language acquisition, cultural adaptation, and early stages of church planting have been heavy, God has reminded us that these are the very things He uses to work in us as we seek to do His work around us. We're grateful for this preparatory work in our lives, and we're excited about our next term. Please pray with us that God will use the first term of preparation and this next term of continued progress to enable us to effectively proclaim the hope of the gospel in the Val de France.
I'd like to just follow up on a couple of things here. When you look at our ministry, it's almost like God's given us two different aspects of ministry. One's more of a private, just everyday living aspect of our ministry, and I'm going to let Liz tell you a little bit about that. The other aspect is what you might call kind of the official ministry that we do, which is down in the Val de France, which I don't know if you caught it. There's that map with it's map of blue, the cities, the 6 cities all together. And they are a densely populated group of cities. Really, it's hard to know when you've passed from one to the next. And what's going on there is that we went up to help. We wanted to plant a church, but while we were getting ready and getting started, we went to this other church because we wanted to fellowship. We didn't really want to worship just as two families. And that church itself was going through a transition time. They have 3 French pastors, all of whom, though, have their own vocations outside of the church. And so they said, would you help us carry a little bit of the teaching load, both Tim and I? And so starting, I guess it's been almost 2 years now, we started preaching once a month on Sundays and then teaching during the week. And as that relationship developed, they said, we're interested and we've had an interest to plant a daughter church. Would you consider coming on and becoming pastors of this church, not to stay, but in order to lead out of this church a daughter church plant? And we prayed a lot about this, talked to our sending pastor and the leadership of our church, leadership of our mission. And all of us ended up thinking, yes, this could be a good idea. And God has blessed it. We've been able to maintain a subordinate position in the church among the leadership. So the French pastors still carry the load at the church, and they maintain the decision-making leadership for that church. And yet God has given us really the blessing of having French believers and French leadership who have wisdom to offer to us as we do this church plant in the Val de France. And what God has done is He's raised up out of the church in Saint-Denis. These are all just names I'm throwing out there, I realize, but the mother church, maybe I'll say. Out of the mother church, there are 2 families who are joining us, as well as 2 adult single people. And they have decided to throw in everything with us. And we are currently looking for a place to meet in the Val de France, so that we can have a permanent presence among the people. We have a place to say, hey, come see us. It's public. That's important because we tried doing evangelistic Bible studies in homes, and the French are very suspicious of that. Just looks cultish, looks dangerous, stay away. And we were counseled, don't do that again. And so we're trying to not do that again. We're trying to have open public areas. That's part of the reasoning behind the website, is that people like to shop. They want to know who you are before they come and step foot in your building, which is the same as here. And so right now, Tim is leading that group and trying to locate a place to stay for us as a church, meet in, and doing the distributions. And I'm able to participate in the distributions because part of my work is planning those out, doing the logistical work, making maps, making sure that we systematically move through the area. So you can pray for the church plant. We need a place to meet in, and it's not cheap, nor is it easy to find a place. And so we need God to give us favor. We need a place big enough for our group, with our two families having 4 kids, another couple with 2 young kids. We can't just start in a 10 by 10 closet. We need a little space, and so you pray for that. I wanted to mention the book fund. People ask me questions about it. What that is essentially is that we want to encourage people to read good books. And what we found is in France, there are books translated into French, good books, but they're very expensive. The law says that no book seller may sell a book for more than 5% off the retail price. So you're not going to get a big break in a bookstore or online or anything. And so many of the people we know, that's difficult financially. And then it's also difficult, there just isn't a culture of reading Christian literature. And so what we've done is we've said, okay, we'll help you. If you promise to read this and you show that you've read it, we'll give you this book, and then we'll give you the next book too, and try to work them through a good list of solid reading. And it's worked pretty well. We've seen people actually taking a book, reading it, liking it so much they lend it, and then it lend it again, and we're seeing 3 readings out of a book. And so that's what we do with the Christian Literature Fund, trying to encourage good reading, and that's part of our Maturing Disciples ministry. I don't think there's anything else I wanted to say about that, so I'll invite Liz to come up, and she's going to share with you a little bit more about kind of our personal witness around Luzarches, the town we live in.
Well, the first thing I'd like to say is all the relationships that we've been able to build in our town are completely the Lord's work. I want to give glory to Him. I want to lift Him up before you, because I cannot stand here and tell you that I am just really good at reaching out and building relationships, and Michael really can't tell you that either. By nature, we both struggle with the intimidation, with feeling introverted around people that we don't know well, with realizing that we are very countercultural, especially in such a humanistic society like France. And so there are all of the normal intimidations and all of the normal, what are they going to think when they find out what we're really like? Are they really going to want to continue to be friends with us and such? So I want to give glory to the Lord, because He has brought various people into our lives, and He's given us the grace to pursue the friendships and to be bold at times when we didn't feel like we could do it. And so it's all His work. The second thing I want to do is ask you to pray. So I'm going to mention a few specific names that were quickly mentioned on the video and tell you just a little bit about a couple of our friends right there in our town. 2 ladies named Nadej which is spelled Nadege, in case anyone wondered, and Annabelle, which Annabel is how she spells it, have become good friends of mine over the last few months. And they actually approached me several months ago and asked me if I would be willing and interested in teaching English to their children. They had found out that Vivian is American and bilingual the previous school year when Annabelle had gone on a field trip with Vivian's class. Her daughter is in the same grade as Vivian. And one morning as I was dropping Adeline off at school, the ladies approached me, and that is a very uncommon thing in France for people who don't know you to just come up to you and start talking to you. So they came up to me with kind of holding back a bit, wondering how I would respond to that. And of course, with a much more open personality, I latched onto it right away, and everyone was then at ease, and we got to spend some time that first morning just getting to know each other. And then the Lord did give the opportunity to start an English class with their 4 kids combined, each of them have 2 kids, and with our 3 older kids, and then another of Vivian's friends. So almost on a weekly basis for several months, we had a class of 8 kids for an English class in our home for an hour. And that's what the Lord used to just start opening up this relationship with these 2 families. And from there, we ended up in their homes at different times for various reasons. We've shared meals together. The kids did a little informal Christmas program together, just our 3 families, just for fun. And the Lord has just given us daily, almost daily opportunities to get to know them better, to be in their lives, for them to be in our lives. And through that, we've been able to share the gospel with them a couple of different times in informal conversation. And it's just been the Lord completely opening the door by questions that they've had for us. Nadej asked us some questions about parenting one day, and instead of trying to give her a quick fix and put a Band-Aid on the problem, we were able to go back to the beginning and start laying a foundation and sharing the gospel and the fact that Jesus is always the answer. So the Lord has just really blessed in just daily life and interacting with them. So if you would pray for Nadej and Annabelle, and then some other friends that we just recently started getting to know, the Legoff family. Their last name is Legoff. They also have children in the same grades as our children. And we've not gotten to spend a lot of time with them, but they have been very warm toward us and very interested in a friendship with us, which has really surprised us because one of the major interactions we've had with them was inviting their kids to a Christmas Bible club that we did in our home, where we clearly shared the gospel. We sent home a gospel tract with it. And even in all of that, there's not been anything that has made them so far shy away from friendship with us. So pray that the Lord would bless efforts in that relationship, that we'd be able to further build with them when we get back. And then one other family, Julie and Antoine, are the parents of one of Vivian's classmates. And so far of all of these friends, they have been the most skeptical and the most critical of our Christian beliefs. So pray that the Lord will soften their hearts, that he'll take off the blinders, that he will show them the truth. And that would be the case for all of these people that I've mentioned. None of them are favorable toward the gospel. None of them are searching. And yet some of these friends have expressed to us that they've started questioning some of their presuppositions, and they've started wondering if what they've always thought is really right or not. So there are, a couple of these friends who seem to be a little further down the line of openness. But pray that the Lord would just make us faithful. Pray that he'd make us bold. Pray that he'd give us wisdom. And pray that he will bless the efforts and bring fruit from sharing the gospel with these different friends.
It's difficult to summarize 3 years, And so what I want to do now is just open it up for questions, because that way I can kind of get a feel for what what you need to find out from us. So if you have a question, I don't know if the best way is for you to lift a hand and then just speak loudly. I'll try to remember to repeat questions so that we all hear. Mr. Short? He asked about the response to giving out gospel tracts. We do that in two different settings. One is that we go to a market. They have the big open air markets and give out tracts, and that usually is, we don't get a lot of feedback. Every once in a while, someone wants to argue, mostly Jehovah's Witnesses or Seventh-day Adventists, sometimes the Muslims a little bit. And then we give out, you're allowed to, in France, put things in the mailboxes. And so we stuff mailboxes with Gospels of John, as well as a piece of literature about the new work. And we've had 4 responses to that, where they either have gone to our website and clicked and requested a full Bible, or they've called the phone number. And so I've been on a visit with one young man who asked for a Bible. And we took him a Bible, tried to speak with him, offered to help him read it. And to this point, that really hasn't turned into any more contact for us. And then just this last outreach they did in February, I guess it was, a lady called and asked for a Bible, and they've had at least one really good visit with her. And I think she's interested in doing more Bible studies with Christy Colas, who is I forgot about her. That's the other thing I was supposed to tell you about. Is a young missionary lady who's been in France for 6 years, and whom God has moved south to Paris to do some work in a master's level. And while she's there, she is going to be helping us as well in the work. And she brings with her a whole lot of knowledge about music, as well as just a good knack at meeting people, following up. And this is really, it's a helpful thing for us because our 2 families have young children. And I know I can speak, especially Liz is really pretty much engaged a lot with just trying to keep us all sane. And so to have extra time to do Bible studies and things with ladies is difficult. So Christy brings in a lot of help along those lines. It's not the most efficient manner, and yet we still do like to get out and give out literature just to make contact and see what God will do. Go ahead, Mr. The home Bible studies, does the government frown on it? It actually is not the government, it's just the French people in general. The French people are rather suspicious people. And so what they admire about Americans is that we're open. At least, we have the appearance of being open, congenial, talk. The French are a little more reserved, and so inviting someone to come into a personal home that's not theirs and they don't know you really to do a Bible study is just a little bit off-putting. And so what I intended to communicate is that we're looking for a public venue, like a storefront that we can turn into a church meeting building area. Or something along those lines, so that it's out in the open, it's public, and when they come, they're not looking like, oh, this is somebody's house, this is awkward. Just French culture. We've had multiple people over to our homes, and when you have a meal with a French, it's not going to be a 30-minute thing. You get to start, and sometime around midnight, 11 to midnight, you're like, let's wrap this up, and the adults will not ask to use your restroom. Okay, that's the private area. And you normally don't just go poking around. You stay in the living area, the dining area, the public rooms, because the French are very private. And so they just trying to communicate to you a little bit of when you start saying, come into my home, you cross a boundary that sometimes it takes a little while to get across that boundary with French. And I see another hand right down here. Yes, sir. Okay, he asked, would I describe the French as being religious? And what's their view of Christianity with regard to other religions? Personally, I would not describe the French as being religious. But you have to realize France is not just made up of French. They're French, the Français de souche, who come from France, and you have the French who come from the islands, the French who come from North Africa, French who come from India, the French who come from the Arab nations. So it's really a melange of people. What did I say, Liz? Melange. It's a mixture. I've made some pretty good doozies of mistakes while I was speaking, so I try to keep my eye on Liz, and then if I say something bad, I know. For instance, for our French Literature Fund, we offered these sessions, and we said, if you'll come to these sessions to teach the Bible, we'll give you this book. And if you read through it and come to the sessions. But the word for session in French is séance. And so at one church I said, we offer these séances, and if you come to our church, it's not the same thing. So that's why I keep one eye on Liz. We don't do séances, just so you know. Religious. I don't think the French are religious in the sense of practicing. If they're under 40, they probably have not been catechized, and they probably don't even think that I'm Catholic. The way they look at Christianity, most of them say, okay, that's fine if you want to be a Christian, but it's just like the rest. It's very postmodern, relativistic, that sort of thing. Mr. Smith? I preach in French now, and what I do is on Sundays I preach from a manuscript. I write it out completely because I feel a greater pressure on Sundays to clearly communicate to the people what God says. We've been preaching through 1 Corinthians, and sometimes we get into some of the passages that are a little bit delicate, and so I've wanted to be careful. But during the midweek, we have a prayer meeting Bible study. And there I force myself to speak extemporaneously with just a few notes to work on the ability to reason, think, change in my mind speaking in French. So that's where I am with French. Yes, sir, Mr. McGuire?
You said that they're under 40. What happened 40 years ago?
May of 1968 is a huge date in French. The French had already, with the Enlightenment and then their revolution, they had already cast off most vestiges of religion. And they had in their mind, in the French psyche, it seems to me, and I'm not an expert, but this is what it seems to me, is that because the church was so closely united with the state, is that when the French Revolution came, both kind of got. And the development of the French public school system really is pretty fascinating. It didn't start all at once. It started off with the grade school for boys. And then they started adding women. And one of the reasons my teacher said is because the women were more susceptible to believe the church teaching. And so they wanted to teach them. And the clear teaching, I was like, wow, I can't believe you're saying this, is that some of that was not so much a concern for girls as girls, but for girls not to grow up into women who followed the church. And that's what you've had going. But I think in 68 it was the Cultural Revolution. I think really that just changed everything. And the French became even more suspicious of religion as being a power play. The philosophers, looking at, religion's all about power and control, and it's power play, following Jean-Paul Sartre and others. And in my understanding, that's kind of the switch, is that things had been, if you had been Catholic, it was cultural, but at that point, the cultural tie was broken. And so now it's wide open. This whole Charlie Hebdo thing, that paper is a terrible tragedy, but that paper is violently anti-Christian. And they've written some very vile things, cartoons about the Lord. And so I'm saddened by the violence and what happened, and yet I look at that, and that's just an expression of the culture. So I think that's what's going on, is that there just was that cultural tie that kind of eroded. And, we really aren't Christians, so why are we acting like it? Man, did you have your hand up? I don't want to skip you.
What do you find about Christian radio? Is that heard at all in France?
Oh, I don't know. There may be something. It's not much if there is something. On the internet, you can find a few things. I know there are some Christian artists, all across, all the way, the whole range, although I think most of it would be more contemporary. But I don't know of a Christian radio station in our area. I think, knocking on doors, you really can't even knock on doors. In France, almost every home's got if you have a front yard, there's a wall up around it. Very private. So knocking on doors is not the way to go really in France, I don't think. If you want to meet people, you need to be involved in your community, or you put stuff in their mailboxes, or you go to the public forums where it's acceptable to be. Mr. Keever, is that you back there? Okay.
You said you could put things in mailboxes. Do you know if you're allowed to go into the schools?
You are not. Well, that depends. I cannot go in as a Christian pastor wanting to go and teach, because they have a very strict separation of church and state. So in the school, you can't even, as a student, you can't even wear a chain with a prominent cross and a cross in a prominent place. However, God does open up opportunities. When it was Thanksgiving, the French don't celebrate Thanksgiving. We asked if we could just send a little cake in for the children with just a little note about Thanksgiving, American holiday. And Vivian's teacher said yes, and then I think he allowed her, and then he explained a little bit about what Thanksgiving was. And then Adeline's teacher actually invited me to come in and present to the class about Thanksgiving. So I was able to go in and tell them about the Pilgrims, why they left in search of the ability to worship God and in truth. And so they're not so anti that they wouldn't do that, but they would never let us come in and hold like a Bible club on the school property. You can't hold church meetings on a school property or that sort of thing. Yes, sir. Not like this. There are private schools. They're mostly Catholic, and yet they're still under the auspices of the French government. And so what they offer is a little bit more discipline. You are allowed to homeschool. We actually have made friends with a family of 6 children, and they homeschool. But immediately our other friends said, they're Roman Catholic. And they are. They seem to be practicing Roman Catholics. But it's not a big movement, and as far as I understand, you're allowed to, at this point, they've been trying to outlaw it, but you're allowed to have homeschooling by family, but 2 families can't get together and share the teaching responsibility for each other. So I don't think like a co-op really wouldn't be illegal in France. Yes, ma'am? Not specifically. Where we're working actually is going to be primarily a ministry among immigrants. Sarcelles would be the most violent of the area because there's a large Jewish, large Muslim populations, and they clash. Well, it's usually a one-sided clash. And it's got the worst reputation. So we've not gone there as a mission to Jews, as a mission to Arabs, or as a mission to Africans. We view it more location-wise. We're in this location, and we're going to reach out to all whom we can. And what that does mean, we have to do a good bit more work to learn how to speak to all these different people and answer their questions. Questions? Yes, ma'am.
What's the percentage of religions overall in France and then the area that you're at?
I haven't been very good at repeating questions. She asked, what's the percentage of religions in France? And then where we're working. Traditionally they would say, okay, it's like 80% say they're Roman Catholic. And that's not too old. I think a survey about 10 years ago, 80% would say we're Catholic. But when you get right down to it, I think 10% of that 80% go to Mass, one time per month or something. Between 6 and 10% of the population are adherents to Islam. And then a little bit under 1% would be Protestant. And then of that, a smaller percentage of that, less, I think it's like 0.8% is Protestant, and under that, there's the evangelical world. Then you have Jehovah's Witnesses, Mormons, that sort of thing as well. Where we're working, there are Muslims, a large population of Muslims. I don't know the percentage, but there are a lot of synagogues. There are not synagogues, mosques. Muslims don't meet in synagogues. I do know that. Then there are the Jewish synagogues. There's a Syrian Chaldean church building, large community. And then there's a large Indian population, like from India. And so we're working kind of in that kind of, within all of that, you have those who practice and those who don't. And I would say those who don't probably make up a larger portion than those who really practice, is what we're dealing with. Is that Bud?
Have you lost any supporting churches or any support that you're in need of replacing?
No, not yet. But we haven't visited all of them, so no. We have not lost support. I mean, we've had some fluctuation, but God's kept things stable. But our cost of living has gone up significantly, and then with the cost of this, there are three things. We've had to raise our support level, and there were three reasons why we did that. One was just cost of living in the Paris area is higher. The second reason is that the church plant is taking, it takes cash to pay for things to hand out and to rent and stuff like that. And then the third reason is that our mission has been forced to raise its business, its office expenses. And in the past, we've paid a 3% fee with a $150 cap, which is really very minimal. And just due to multiple reasons, they've had to raise that. Well, they're going to raise it in 2 increments, 1 to 5%, then up to 8%, with no cap. And so it's still under the 10% that a lot of mission boards need. But for those reasons, we're trying. We've had one meeting in another church that's considering us and just praying about it. But 3 years have taught us that God's going to take care of us. So we really are not worried about that aspect. Okay. Well, I don't want to make this awkward for anybody, you or me. So if you don't have any questions that are just popping up in your mind. No. Okay, well, I do invite you to the back. We're missionaries to France. There are no snake skins or shrunken skulls. But I would like to talk with you, and please do take a card to remind you to pray. Just take a couple of minutes and think through a passage. I'll start with, you can go ahead and turn to John 1. One of the cities that we are focusing on is called Sarcelles, and Sarcelles is divided into 2 parts. There's Sarcelles Village, the village, which is the older part, kind of the more middle class area. And then there's the new Sarcelles, which was supposed to be the Sarcelles of the future, but which is essentially fallen into disrepute, and it's not very nice. And we've been in both sides, but this one particular day we were in the Sarcelles village, the village, handing out invitations to an evangelistic Bible study. And I was handing out these invitations, and this taller, elderly man, very distinguished looking, came up, and I offered him one. He said, "What's that?" So it's an invitation to a Bible study, and he said, after I communicated what we were doing, he said, "Do you believe that really?" I said, "Yes, I do. I believe that Jesus is God. I'm a Christian." And he said, "You know what?" And this is what he surprised me. He said, "You should fall down, get down on your knees right now and worship me." And he said that to me. I was like, "Oh, it's not exactly what I expected from you." And I was, "Why?" And he said, essentially, if you would believe what you believe, then you're gullible and you might as well just worship me as well. Okay. And, it ended up, he's nicer than he seemed. We had a good conversation. And he didn't believe, but we had a good conversation. And he raised a point, okay? Is that what about this Jesus makes him worthy of worship? Okay, are we just idiots who are ready to worship anybody? Or was Jesus different? And, if I were sharp-witted and quicker, I could have said, "Well, what have you done worthy of worship?" Right, But I'm not sharp-witted or quick, and so I didn't think of that until after. So I've been looking for him. And if I find him, I'll know what to ask him. But what I'd like to do is just take a couple of minutes, really, and just remind ourselves, why do we worship Jesus? Okay. Is he really worthy of worship? I mean, really. We're looking at a man and we're saying, "You, by my own confession, Jesus, you deserve my devotion. You deserve for me to obey you. You deserve for me to follow you, even if it means discomfort and death." And how I'd like to do that is just for us to look at a very well-known passage, something you're extremely familiar with, what we call the preamble to John's Gospel. The prologue, not the preamble, the prologue to John's Gospel. John's Gospel is fascinating. Do you realize that this is the only gospel that claims to be written by an eyewitness? Matthew wrote his, but he's not saying in there, I witnessed this, I saw this. Luke, up front, tells us this is the result of his careful research and putting together the story as he's followed it. Mark, we're told, is communicating to us the words of an eyewitness, and yet he doesn't present it as an eyewitness testimony. But John, when he gives it to us, it is laid out to communicate to us this idea of witness. This was seen, this was observed. I'm telling you as an eyewitness. And we have copies going way back, way back. And we have portions that go even further back, getting us really close to a document that claims to be the eyewitness account of the life of Jesus. It's really, to me, it's just a fascinating thing to hold it and to realize I'm reading something real. Not a fairy tale, not a myth, but an account of historical events. And you realize if it's not real, there's no point in being a Christian, right? Christianity is no good unless Jesus really lived and really died and really rose again. If he didn't, then we should all do something else with our lives. But he did, and there are people who saw it. And when John wrote his gospel, he didn't write it in a haphazard way like you might send a text message, right? With very little thought as to structure and wording and double entendre, things like that. He wrote it very carefully. And these first 18 verses are extremely well written. They're so well written that the men and women who spend their lives studying these verses argue about whether this is poetry or whether this is prose, or is it poetic prose, or is it prosaic poetry? I don't know. It's just well written because he wants to communicate to us the themes that you're going to read in the entire gospel. He wants you to see them right up front. And what I'd like for us to do is just to look at two things about Jesus that make him worthy of worship. One is who he is, his nature, and the other is what he does. Okay, so the first is just his nature. In verses 1 and 2, this is just an overview, okay? Verses 1 and 2 point out to us that this Jesus is eternal God. Eternal God. And so you read that in the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. And this in the beginning is intentional, right? What beginning? Well, I think he's drawing us back to Genesis, the beginning of all. And when all that began, here he was already being. And this is to get us to think, okay, you're about to read a book about someone like you have never, ever heard of or met. Imagine picking up the next biography you read, and the first sentence said, before the world began, Napoleon was. And you think, oh, what a crack. What a crackpot. This is out the door. I'm not going to read this book. And yet here it is about Jesus saying that. And if Jesus, and we believe he is, who this says he is, if he existed before, if he is eternal, then he has relevance for today. Because he stands outside of time. He's not restricted. He doesn't age like, you think, well, why read about Napoleon's code? It's so dated. We need new stuff about the law. Or why read Jesus as a philosopher? We have new philosophers. No, Jesus doesn't age. He doesn't date because he stands outside of time. And he is God. And John is being very careful here, right? Do you kind of see how he's doing this? The Word was, and he says the Word was with God. That means that they're distinct, right? Yeah, I never talk about myself as, I was with myself, because that's weird, right? You don't speak that way. If I say I was with someone, then that means there's someone there too. And John knows he has to be careful here, so he says immediately, the Word is not all that God is. God is more than the Word, because there's distinction here. But then he says, but the Word was God. There's this equality. So you have the Word who is God, then you have the God who is not the Word. And he's introducing us to this idea of the Father who is God and the Son who is God. That's a doozy of an opener, right? Jesus is eternal God. And that alone is reason enough for us to worship him. But he's not just, he's not just the eternal God. He's the eternal God who is the source of life. Okay, so you just read on a little bit more. All things were made by him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shineth in darkness, and the darkness comprehended or did not overcome it. He is the source of all life. Now, when you read John, you see pretty quickly that John likes to do double entendre, that two meanings, that idea. And so I think what's going on here is the same thing. Jesus is the source of light. And so this evening, if you see stars producing light, that light comes from God, because it comes from Jesus, because he created it. All things were made by him. Without him was not anything made that was made. But he's also the spiritual light. And I think you'll see this borne out all throughout John. But for me, what is so fascinating is that it says life was in him. Now, I'm not a builder, but when I try to build things, everything comes from outside of me. I go buy everything, and then I put it together. When Jesus made things, what did he do? It came from within. And when there was life in the ocean, when there was life on the ground, when there's life in the air, it's because it came out of his life. And even though he gathered human man in dust and created him, and he made a woman from a bone, the life came from within Jesus. And that is a light for us today. Every living, breathing human being is the light of Jesus. Because today we know that actually all life is held together by Jesus. And if he stops holding us together, it's all gone. It's all gone. So, why do I worship Jesus? Well, many reasons. But I worship Jesus because he's eternal God who is the source of life. And he's the eternal God who is the source of life who came to save. Okay, so you read a little bit later on, the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. The glory is of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. And John talks about him. I came, the one who is greater than I am is coming, for he is before me. And of his fullness all we have, all we received, grace, for the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. He came bringing salvation. And that's why he was here. And verse 18 tells us how he did that. No man hath seen God at any time. The only begotten Son, or God, which is in the bosom of the Father, he hath declared him, or he has revealed him, the Father. And this really is how Jesus' ministry worked. God came down and took on flesh. It's the tabernacle idea here in these verses. And when Jesus walked, it was God himself here. And he perfectly revealed the Father, his function as prophet. And that's why later on, right, when Philip said, hey, if you would just show us who the Father is, we would be great. And Jesus, he says, what? I could just see him kind of like, what? How long have I been here? And you don't know that if you know me, you know the Father? If you've seen me, you've seen the Father? So what he's doing is, it's the eternal God, that means he's outside of time, has made himself come into time in order to reveal the Father and make the way to the Father available to us. That's why he's called the Lamb of God. And all of this brings us to a point of decision, right? It really does. So I'll just read these verses. Verse 6, there was a man sent from God whose name was John. The same came for a witness to bear witness of the light, that all men through him might believe. He was not that light, but was sent to bear witness of that light. That's the one who was the true light, which lighteth every man, or it kind of illumines every man, that he came into the world. He was in the world, and the world was made by him, and the world knew him not. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. But as many as received him, to them gave he power to become the sons of God, even to them that believe on his name, which were born not of blood, nor of the will of the flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. And in the picture I have in my mind, okay, is that light came into the world and it illumined everybody. Just like you walk into a dark room, maybe you hear bumping in the night, you get up, you go and you flip on the light really fast. Now, if you flipped on the light really fast, it's palmetto bugs or roaches, whatever you want to call them. What do? They scurry. They reject the light and they seek the darkness. But what if you come in and you flip on the light and it's one of your children scared trying to find their way to your room? What do? They run to you, right? Because there you are, they can see, they want you. And that really is what Jesus coming into the world has done. He's forced a decision. You either accept him or you reject him. And in our world, it seems almost impossible, right? You're like, who's going to accept him? Really? In France, who's going to come to Christ? Well, the encouraging thing I take from this is verse 13. There are some who do. And verse 13 tells us that it's the more intelligent people with good sense. That's really not what it says, is it? Not at all. Who were born not of blood, nor of the will of flesh, nor of the will of man, but of God. So that's my hope. In France, I'm there with people who are philosophically oriented, who love to debate, and who are antithetically set against the message I bring. In the United States, you're in the same boat. And no matter where you live, same boat. What's our hope? Our hope is that there are some who receive, and they're the ones who are born of God. And that's what we'd like for you to pray about for us, really. Would you pray that God will awaken people, that he will give them new birth, so that they will become the children of God? Thank you.